anyway, the political issues were well discussed. I was aware of the news. In the military, we had quite a bit of conversation, and we were informed by Armed Forces Radio. We often were supplied copies of the Stars and Stripes newspaper, which was a newspaper published by the military, and it tried to keep us informed. But we also met some of the civilian people, some of the South Vietnamese Army.
Mm-hmm.
We had a Kit Carson scout that was a formerly, he was from North Vietnam and served in the North Vietnamese Army. And after his surrender, he was given the opportunity to be an ARVN Ranger, go through their training, and then become a scout for our unit.
Mm-hmm.
And so we lived with him. He went with us. He was part of our unit, and so we were able to get his opinion and his perspective from his background. And he was a man, 34 years old, had a wife and 2 children, and he was a scout with us. He helped us navigate in the bush, and
Mm-hmm.
he would warn us if we were in danger. And just like Indian scouts in the movies, he was kind of our eyes and ears.
Mm-hmm.
But his perspective on the war, he'd been fighting since he was 17 years old, so he had a lot more experience than we had. He'd been there for 17 years doing that type of work, and so it was interesting, especially as we got towards the end of the ground forces engagement. He and his friends and family knew that the era was coming to a close,
Mm-hmm.
and so we got his perspective on what the end of our engagement there would be and how it would affect him and his family. And it was eye-opening to understand. Those people were in fear of their lives,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them had plans to leave for Cambodia or Thailand. And so yes, we were probably a lot more informed while we were in Vietnam as soldiers than we were back in civilian life. But it was such an issue on campus, and in the news there was a lot of activism,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was similar to college campuses today with social issues and political issues.
Mm-hmm. Was it going to affect those people in particular, the outcome of the war that you met, the civilians?
Yes. Anyone who had been friendly to the United States or to the regime in South Vietnam would be persecuted or be imprisoned or killed, purged.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the soldiers had great fear of what would happen after we left and left our support.
Mm-hmm.
Those that were capable, for instance, this man that I talk of that was our scout, he was very wise to the ways of what was going on, and he had made certain that his family would be cared for, and he had made arrangements so that he could get his family and leave the country if necessary.
Uh-huh.
A lot of our civilian people and employees, the U.S. government made arrangements for them to leave the country or come to America as refugees. So we tried to help as many of those people as we could, but once the war started winding down and the news, politically, they were announcing for political reasons that we were ending the war and we were going to pull out. And so it was devastating to a lot of people in South Vietnam, and to a lot of U.S. soldiers it was devastating too.
For them.
For them.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it had great repercussion on the South Vietnamese people,
Mm-hmm.
the way the war was about to end.
Mm-hmm. What was the general attitude of all the members of the military into regards why you were there, the purpose?
Well, I'll be honest with you, most of the people I was with didn't have a very high regard of the government or the military. And I imagine in in a wartime situation where the majority of the soldiers are drafted, not wanting to be there in the first place, any mismanagement, any mistakes by those calling the shots, so to speak, would be met with, disregard. I mean, we were highly critical. We didn't want to be there in the first place, and so when we could see the situation on the ground and how mismanaged it was and how unfeasible the whole plan was, yeah, it was easy to disparage those in charge or in the government and to take a political view, but also just realistically, those with common sense could see that it wasn't a practical solution to what had gone on and what was going on.
Yeah. Oh, did you ever?
Yeah, keep on.
Did you ever get any sicknesses while you were there?
Yeah. Being in the bush in that climate,
Don't have a lot of good resources.
high humidity, well, there's a lot of bacteria, and any little scratch or cut or abrasion would get infected. We had a medic in our unit, and so boils and infections, typical jungle diseases, jungle rot, your feet and other, there were always ailments and people injured, besides battle wounds and injuries. And malaria. While we were there, the medic, our unit medic, would dispense malaria pills every day. Everybody in the unit, you had to stay on the dosage. But even at that, a lot of times when we weren't resupplied water, we had to find water wherever.
And it wouldn't be.
And we would drink old stagnant water because we'd be 30 miles up in the mountains and no rainwater. A lot of times we captured rainwater for drinking water. But yeah, there were times when drinking water wasn't the best, and so you were subject to the climate, to insects. One time I leaned up against a rock and a big centipede I smashed it into my arm, big hairy caterpillar looking centipede, and my arm just swelled up like a volleyball right there. And, I mean, everything was infectious and poisonous. One morning after sleeping on the ground and putting all my stuff back in my rucksack, something just in my head said, better check your rucksack. So I dumped it out and 2 scorpions were in there and they crawled off. So there are always things like that you had to be aware of, snakes and bugs. But sleeping on the ground every night, day after day after day, I finally developed looked like big boils and bruise. Looked like a bruise that was infected on my shoulders, my knees, my hips, anywhere you would contact the ground.
Yeah.
And finally got so much infection that I just got sick and had to go to the hospital for a couple weeks with just a high white blood cell count, just a massive infection. And while I was in the hospital, it was interesting. I was in a medical ward and it was just full of people that had pneumonia, big boils and lesions, and all kinds of ailments. And it was common for infantrymen, every time we come in out of the bush, to have to go to the medical center and have a boil lanced or have infections dressed or things taken care of. So other than battle and battle injuries, there was a lot of other health issues while we were there.
Yeah.
Sanitation was sanitation was very primitive, I guess you would say. Yeah. No sanitary facilities much. no